So we're diving into the special senses. Well, not just special senses, also the somatic senses, which just means the general senses that we deal with. This is one of my favorite chapters because it's very practical, right? This is how we interact with the world on a daily basis, or through our senses, right? And so it is a specialized function of our nervous system to be able to interact, to get information from your environment. And so we're talking about sensations, which again, this is an input, right? It's the signal that is formed based on something that we feel or taste or touch or smell or hear, right? This input coming in. So let's talk about some receptors first. Because maybe you've never actually thought about how your nervous system gets a signal. We just say, oh yeah, you know, my ear gets, I hear the sound and off we go. But how does it physically take this physical something in our world and turn it into an electrical impulse that goes to your brain? Doesn't that seem a little bit questionable? How, when I smell something, does that turn into a signal in my brain, right? So that's where these receptors come in. There's 5 different types of these receptors that we deal with. The first of these is a chemoreceptor. A chemoreceptor, and of course the study guide is up, the PowerPoint is up, all those pieces are. Remember, Tuesday, it's a week from tomorrow, is this assessment here, okay? It's quick, Hector, I know. Yeah, it's quick. It's quick. Chemoreceptors, what do you think those guys deal with? Cancer? No. Chemo, right? No. Chemicals, yes, chemicals. So these are receptors that bind with some sort of chemical, and that chemical combination produces the sensation, produces the current. What kind of senses do you think would deal with these chemoreceptors? What kind of sense, like one of our senses, do you think uses chemoreceptors? You smell good. My nose is a little runny, but that helped. Good. Your sense of smell, right? Taste as well. These are chemoreceptors, the actual sensors. We'll talk in more detail about these. We'll talk about all 5 senses in a lot of detail. Excruciating detail, Aaron. But those are chemoreceptors, okay, just in a general sense. Okay? Pain receptors are your next ones. Pain receptors deal with what? Pain, of course. But what does that mean? Like, what causes that signal? Being hurt, or even more specifically, damage to the tissues. You with me? There's been some sort of, whether it's a tear, whether it's a pressure, whether there's a lot of different pieces that can cause that damage. But when there is damage, your body says, ouch, please stop. We cool? Those are your pain receptors. We continue on. Number 3 is thermoreceptors. What do you think thermoreceptors deal with? Temperature, heat or cold, right? We got both of those sensors. Chapter 10. Okay? So we actually have 2 different kinds of sensations, this hot and cold, that your body can feel and say, hey, this is hot. Ooh, that's cold. And again, it's receptive to temperature differences. Your textbook actually gives you precise detail on that. We'll talk a little more when we get into it. Of a temperature range that you can sense. Once it's above there, it becomes pain. Once it's below there, it becomes pain. So you can sense hot and cold at a certain range, but above and below that, it just goes straight to pain. Sure. No, most of our foods we eat are a combination of flavors, which actually gives us more pleasure. We like that better than usually just one solid solo flavor piece. So no, it can pick up all. Yeah, and there's actually 5 different, we'll talk about 5 different types of flavors that your tongue senses. Right, yeah, they're actually bonding with something to actually form that. The fourth type of receptor is a mechanoreceptor. What do you think a mechanoreceptor does? Mechanicals. Well, we don't have any mechanicals in our body. Movement, right? There's some change in pressure or movement. So when I touch this table and my fingers actually deform, right? That is sending a signal to my brain. Hey, you are touching something. There's a change in pressure. The skin has actually undergone this movement. So your sense of touch is all mechanoreceptors. And last but not least, number 5 is photoreceptors. So what kind of sense do you think, photoreceptors are what? Receptors that take photos. They're like paparazzi. No, the light, right? This is talking about photons. Okay? So these are light-sensitive receptors. When light comes, they fire. So what sense do you think uses photoreceptors? Our sight, our vision, right? Good, good. Okay, so let's talk about our senses and sensations in general, because this is a very interesting thing. Andrew, because he doesn't know better, and we'll use both Andrews because they'll both do this. They touch a stove randomly because they're trying to be suave with some, and they put their hand on the stove, right? Are you comfortable that signal goes from the brain, from the hand, up, let's pick the radial nerve since they've touched their first 2 fingers here, up into that C6, C7 root in their spinal cord, up into the ascending tract, up into the brain, into that parietal lobe just behind the central sulcus, right? Where we have sensation. And it says, ouch, that is hot. Please move your hand. Then that signal goes over to the motor side, right? Which is just in front of that central sulcus on the frontal lobe, sending it down the descending tract through the brainstem to that same nerve root, C6, C7, up to the bicep to say, hey, no, get that off there. Are we cool? Are you comfortable? That is a long pathway to go through. How is it that your brain actually knows that it's not your brain that is hot, but your hand? Are you with me? Because the signal coming into the brain is coming in this one little tract that's in your brain. The brain's not down in the hand, right? So how does it know it's the hand that is doing that work? That's what this thing called projection is. Or the brain actually sends the sensation back to its point of origin, where it started from, and says, oh yeah, that's my fingers that are on that stove, not my brain that's on the stove. Does that make sense? So even though the signal is in the brain, your brain projects it out to say, hey, no, it's actually my fingers that are feeling that pain or feeling that temperature change. Does that make sense? Again, we never think about that. We just think, well, of course our brain does that. But is that not kind of cool that it can interpret that input signal as being from a specific part of your body? What's interesting is that that signal can sometimes cause problems. Before we go there. The sensory adaptation is basically where a signal is coming in so often that your brain ignores it. For example, can you feel your shoes? Did you feel them before I mentioned your shoes? No, you just tuned it out. Because all day long, your feet feel the sensation of gripping of the shoes around, right? Or another one to good think about is like the waistband of your underwear, or ladies, like your bra. You don't feel it all day long. Well, hopefully you don't, right? But if I turn your attention to it, you're like, oh yeah, no, I can feel that that's there. Does that make sense? Understand? Does that make sense? So unless there's some sort of change in stimulus where suddenly it becomes too tight or it gets caught on something, you just adapt. You just ignore it. Does that make sense? All right. In other words, something has changed in how that stimulus is sent up to your brain. In other words, if you're walking through the weeds and suddenly a thorn gets in your sock, Well, now you feel your socks, right? Every time you take a step, you feel that thing rubbing. That's a change in stimulus. Does that make sense? But if it stays the same, you'll ignore it. Yeah. Your brain in some ways kind of tunes it out. You're right. A chronic pain, which we'll talk more about pain in a second, but that would be something that we just can't get rid of. It just sticks around there for a long period of time. Yeah, it's good. Okay, we'll go back. I thought we were going to talk about something different with projection, but it's fine. I'll follow the pieces that are here. So we're talking about the somatic senses. The somatic, in your outline, I called them general senses. So we're not talking about the special senses. Special senses are the touch, taste, smell, right? Well, sorry, seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting. Those are your special, equilibrium. Those are your special senses. These are your general one, right? So the first one we'll talk about is our touch and pressure, okay? And there are kind of three types that deal with this. Our free nerve endings. These guys deal with touch and pressure, just very, very straightforwardly simple ones. And again, there's a nice picture that shows you these different types. You've been seeing nerves that look like this, right? Those are our free nerve endings, just generally in the skin. Looks like tree roots going up in there. Our next two are more specialized. You have the Meissner's corpuscle, and of course that's just the name of the gentleman who found them. Mr. Meissner, that these guys are very sensitive to light touch. So these are your light touch receptors. So these are going to be on places where, again, you are very sensitive to. Any ideas what kind of places those would be? Your armpit. Could be. You're thinking about being ticklish. I got you. I would say, thankfully, I don't think this is usually too sensitive an area. It could be. I don't have to look up that one. I never thought of that one. It's a good thought. Palms of your hands. Hands, fingers, and I would say fingers more than palms even. These are lots of Meissner's corpuscles in your fingers. Where else? Your lips. That's one of the things it talks about here. Where else do you think might be? Feet, bottoms of feet, though that depends on how much you're walking without shoes, because those can be very non-sensitive as well. Any others? Yes. It's because it's called neuropathy. The nerves themselves start breaking down, and they can't get the signals down there. No, but the feet is often where it shows up at. They have neuropathies in lots of different places. Hands, feet. Yeah. That's a very common thing. Sir? Genitals would be the other one that I was looking for. Absolutely. Lots of good Meissner's corpuscles there. Again, light touch. That's what Meissner's do. Pacinians are for deep pressure. You see the difference? This little light touch, I'm just barely touching the table, that'd be my Meissner's. But if I push in more, that's going to be my Pacinians that are sending those signals. Free nerve endings, just general sensation and even pain. Meissner's corpuscles, the light touch. Pacinian corpuscles, the deep pressure. Yeah. Yep. For the temperature, because these temperature receptors, again, have a temperature range, which I thought was very interesting. That above 113 degrees Fahrenheit, when you have that temperature on your skin, that's where it gets to be painful. If it's below 50 degrees Fahrenheit, then you're dealing with pain as well. In between those, you sense it as being hot or cold. And it makes sense because above that temperature or below that temperature, it could damage the skin, right? So you want your brain to not just say, oh, that's nice and warm, that feels good. No, you want to say, I'll move this away before it damages your skin. Sir? If you hold it long enough, not initially, maybe not initially it won't, because it's got to lower the temperature of your skin first, and your skin's pretty warm. But if I just made you hold ice for a long period of time, it would hurt. Because remember that you have warmth here in your hands. So when you put a cold something into your hand, it has to warm those tissues up.
Make your hand cold enough.
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
What's the hot temperature?
113. It's 45 degrees Celsius, but I translated to Fahrenheit, 113. Yeah. Please.
Is that why, I don't know if that happened to you, but when I was younger, in elementary school, they wouldn't let us play outside if it was...
Yeah, because people don't always come dressed as appropriately as they should. I think that's more than one supposed to get sick in that. Could you get frostbite? Sure, if it's cold enough. Sure, yeah. That's more where they're going for, though. Just generalized. I would imagine it probably wasn't because of temperature sensations they were thinking of that. But it makes sense. Sure. Please.
I have a story.
Please.
So have you heard about if you put a frog in like a pot of water and then you slowly heat it, it'll eventually kill the frog and it'll just stay there?
Right.
Are you
Right.
abusing this?
Though it is often difficult to get the frog to stay there that long. It's one of those great stories about stress. That if you put a frog into a regular water, just tepid and lukewarm water, but then slowly heat it up, the frog doesn't realize it's getting hot. It will eventually jump out, to be honest with you. It's a little apocryphal, the story. But it's a great, the thought is you have to be careful how much stress you're under. Because sometimes you don't even realize it. We just deal with so much on a daily basis, you don't even realize the difficulty. Shh. You're getting adapted to it, absolutely. Yes. Sensation, temperature sensation does adapt quickly. Yes.
So that thing where it has the alternating strips of
Yeah.
is that why when you do that, it just tricks the nerve receptors to thinking your phone's either too way over the top?
Right. Your brain freaks out, and so you withdraw. Yeah. Eric is mentioning, do you remember I mentioned that, stay with me, guys, that hot-cold tubes that's at the Baltimore Science Center, that when you touch it, even though you know it's not, like when you first touch it, you like withdraw in pain, like, ooh, that hurt. But if you then just put your hand on it, you realize it's really not hot or really not cold. It's just both together, your brain freaks out. It's like, pain, get rid of it. So, yeah, it's cool. That's exactly it. Okay, sense of pain. We're just rolling along through these general receptors here. Shh. Our sense of pain comes from those free nerve endings. Remember? Free nerve endings, the roots, and then Meissner's, light touch, Pacinian's, deep touch. So those are stimulated when the tissues are damaged. And thankfully, they adapt very little. Temperature sensation, if I hold something in my hand that's cold enough, eventually I don't realize it's that hot or that cold, right? Like if you use the same finger, if you're trying to test water, how hot it is, if you keep using the same finger over and over and over again, you don't realize how hot it actually gets. You have to pick a different one because that finger gets used to that heat. Does that make sense? I have this great story of my mom. She has had numerous surgeries on her right wrist from neurological injuries. Anyway, and one time she was warming up some soup for my aunt, and she kept sticking her finger in. She's like, man, this microwave is just not working very well. And finally I said, well, okay, I'll just eat the soup cold. So after microwaving it for maybe 4 or 5 minutes, she hands it to my aunt, who takes a bite, and like just burns her mouth. My mom had been using the finger that basically is numb and didn't realize that she was testing it, right? So it just totally adapted, right? No temperature there at all. You can have many different signals that cause pain, not just simply damage, but it can also be some chemical or oxygen deprivation, like you don't have enough oxygen in the tissue, and your body says, hey, we need to breathe, give us oxygen, and that signal will come as pain. No, muscle cramps is usually just too much lactic acid built up, or not enough potassium, or not enough water. Those are kind of your 3 big causes for that.
Well, don't you get fatigued because of oxygen deprivation?
You can, sure, right. We talked about that. Yeah.
It's not like pain so much, it's just like tired.
Right. We're talking about just necessarily taking that lactic acid and converting it back to glucose. Okay, so there's two kinds of, or different kind of pain that maybe you all have not heard of or thought of. And that's called referred pain. So, how many of you have ever felt pain in your elbow? Yeah, you banged it, right? Sure, sure. How many of you have ever felt pain in your foot? Cool. How many of you have ever felt pain in your intestines? Oh, okay. How about pain in your kidneys? I mean, we don't. But are you comfortable these organs have pain receptors? So there are pain receptors there. But are you comfortable they very rarely get stimulated? So what your brain does, because the pathway for pain for my intestines is the same as pain other places, your brain interprets the pain from your organ as being from your skin. We call that referred pain. There's this lovely diagram here that's there on page 277 that shows you some common areas. When you have a heart attack, where do folks often feel pain? Chest pain and left arm, right? Left shoulder, left arm. That's a very classic. Are you comfortable that there is nothing wrong with your left arm when you're having a heart attack? It's just because of the way the nerves come into the brain. There's nothing wrong with your left arm, but man, your shoulder or your arm is killing you. Your brain interprets pain from the heart, because a heart attack is actually your heart muscle doesn't have enough oxygen. The circulation is blocked. It interprets the pain of that heart as being in your arm. The same thing again, there's lots of places they show you here. Lungs, if your lungs have pain, you often feel it in your neck. Strange, but true. Again, because your brain doesn't get signals from your lungs very often talking about pain, and so it says, well, that can't be the lungs, it must be the neck. Right? Because they come in the same way. They come in the same road. We don't realize which way it came in. So that, if you want to be the honest truth, this is why your physician would get paid so much money. Because they got to figure out, I come in and say, ooh, I got neck pain, Isabelli. What's causing my neck pain? And there's like 1,000 things that can cause me pain right here. And you do tests, you do things to figure out which one is most likely. Does that make sense? We call that differential diagnosing. Right, because I can't always say for sure 100% your neck pain's being caused by your lungs. But if I take a chest x-ray and I see a lot of infiltrate, lots of fluid on your lungs, I would say, yeah, that could certainly be causing there. If I do an MRI and I see your nerve root pushing out, or your disc pushing out on the nerve root, well, that certainly could be causing it. Does that make sense? It's a lot of things. Again, that's why they go to school for so long, to be able to figure out, okay, what's causing this pain? And sometimes they go like this, I don't know, let's try this. More than you would think, to be honest with you. Referred pain, are you comfortable with that? An amputee, somebody who has lost an arm. Boom, my arm has been cut off, right? Because I'm a soldier and it got blew off by an IED, okay? There are times they will still have finger pain on a finger that's no longer there. We call that phantom limb pain. And they're like, oh, my finger is just killing me. Like somebody's got it in a vice. Because their brain is getting a signal in that nerve that's no longer there, like to places that's no longer there, but it's interpreting it that, hey, no, you have an arm still, a finger, and it hurts. So sometimes you like put pressure on that nerve, like in the elbow, for example, and you can relieve that pain. It's crazy.
So my grandfather's brother had to amputate one of his legs.
Yeah.
And so when he got out of surgery, he had to use the bathroom, but he forgot when he got out of surgery. So he went to get up and walk, and he fell.
Right. Very common. Very common. You forget. That happens more often than you would think. Yeah. Because again, your brain just thinks, oh no, it's all there. Let's just take a step. Whoops. Over you go. Yeah. Are you with me, friends? Good. So two types of pain fibers. Our acute pain is what most of you have dealt with at some point, I assume all of you have dealt with, at some point in your life, right? There are these thin, myelinated nerves. They carry impulses rapidly, and when the stimulation stops, they stop sending signals. Makes sense, right? The tissue is no longer in danger of being damaged. I stop sending a signal. Our chronic nerve fibers are unmyelinated, so they conduct it much slower. Remember, myelin is what makes things conduct faster. And they sometimes keep sending those impulses even after the stimulus stops. So you crack your shin against the table really hard. Boom! Oh, and it hurts initially, right? But then it kind of goes into this dull kind of ache, right? Excuse me, that's more your chronic pain. So the acute was that initial, oh man, that really hurt. And eventually, shortly, within maybe 15 or 20 minutes, that kind of acute pain settles out, and you get some of that chronic pain. That stimulation is still being sent, but there's still no danger damage-wise to the material. Yeah, exactly, that kind of throbbing, achy, burning kind of feeling. Those are kind of chronic pain words. That sharp, stabbing, that's more of your acute pain kind of word. And the difficulty is, and this is a very tough thing, is that for some folks, they have this chronic pain that we can't figure out why it's there. We even have some students at this school who have chronic headaches or chronic pain places that they haven't been able to pinpoint exactly what's going on. You just have to deal with the pain management. Try and help them get through their day and not be overwhelmed by this amount of pain. It's not a fun life at all, truthfully. I would not wish it on anybody. And again, this is talking more about those routes that things are going up into the brain. Yep. Well, that sensation area is going to be just behind that central sulcus in the parietal lobe. So it's kind of going up toward that area. Yeah. This piece. Yep. It's going up through that gray matter into the dorsal. Remember, dorsal means the posterior, right? Ventral's front, dorsal's back. Right, because remember there's two different entryways or exits into the spinal cord. One sensory, then coming out the motor. Motor's in the front, sensory's in the back, right? And then up through the thalamus and hypothalamus, up to that cerebral cortex. Again, that sensory lobe just posterior to that central sulcus. 10:04. I think that we're going to call that good because I don't think I want to dive into the next sense. Oh, regulation. Sorry, let's do that one quick. How do I deal with regulating this pain? Right? So the cerebral cortex, your brain has to judge how intense is that pain and where is it located? Like, does that mean I should act? Is it just I have a little thorn in my shoe? Okay, let's take my shoe off and get it out. Do I have a knife sticking out of my chest? Okay, I'm going to behave differently, right, based on those two things. Your body has some ways that we try and overcome pain. We try and control it. Endorphins are your natural pain control. Before I was a runner, I didn't believe that this actually happened. But has anybody actually exercised really hard? Maybe you've gone at a hard practice or you've just run and run a race, something like that, and suddenly afterwards you feel really good, right? This is this natural endorphins that are released when you exercise like that. And again, those of you who've never felt that, you're like, wait, what? Like by exercising you feel good? It is the weirdest thing, but it's true. And you can literally become addicted to that. It's actually a good addiction to have. Mr. Kittleson would tell you, oh yeah, no, I need to run because I feel so much better when I do. My wife talks about this when we go and actually do our exercises. Oh man, I feel so good, even though I'm tired. These endorphins. So this is that natural pain control. It helps to naturally get rid of those aches and pains from that exercise. So, again, depression is a huge different thing. What it can be is that for some reason your brain is not producing enough of those natural serotonins that helps keep the mood elevated and keeps you more on an even keel. You tend to be more, this is your baseline. Does that make sense? So by taking that medication, it just brings that baseline up a bit. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It's a good question. And I'll say this. We'll talk a bit more about depression coming up, but are you comfortable that this is an amazing chemical balance of things, your brain is? So I understand the folks who say, no, I just want to pray. I'm just going to, God will take care of my depression. I get that, and I have faith for that. I'm okay with that. But are you comfortable that sometimes there's actually a chemical imbalance that by taking some medication you can settle that out? I don't see what the problem is with that. Maybe you all have never heard of that before, but some folks are like, oh no, you shouldn't take the medicine. Yeah. Absolutely. It's not a one-time piece. It's not a this is all you have to do. But again, if your lungs were not working correctly, you would take medicine to help fix that piece, right? If your intestines weren't working right, you would take medicine to help. Why would you not do the same thing for your brain? That's my thought, at least. Okay? And again, what these guys do, these enkephalins and the serotonins, they're inhibiting those pain impulses. They're actually sending the signal saying, no, settle down. We're good here. You don't have to be all worried about it. Sir?
So do the same medications release?
Pain medicines have a ton of different functions, to be honest. One of them could be that they're stimulating those pieces. Your opioids would do something like that, yeah. And there's other pieces where it's blocking different places, either in the brain or at the receptors. It just depends.
So do we need to know about those are examples, or
I'd have to look. I have to look at the review sheet. I don't want to tell you for sure until I look. But yeah, these are there. Sir?
When does your body produce dopamine?
Dopamine is like the pleasure hormone that's produced from that. So, yeah, right, the happiness kind of piece. Yeah, so there are a number of different things that could give that. And sometimes that's what these drugs are kind of, sometimes more your bad drugs or abusive drugs, is mimicking that. So you get that big hit and, hey, I want more of that. Yeah. Good, my friends. We will continue tomorrow with our sense of smell. Wednesday, am I correct? Wednesday is when I have for the questions to be done? Okay, it's on Schoology. Reading, right? You're getting yourself familiar so that when we talk about it, you're like, oh yeah, I remember me reading about that. Good.